Alright, so this lesson is on shape tweens. Shape tweens is the ability to morph the shape of itself as an object or to morph itself into a completely different object, okay? So to illustrate that, I'm going to show you this example. I have two different morphs going on. One is where a shape just changes itself into another shape. And then the other one is where it takes one shape of one color and morphs into a totally different shape of another color, okay? So we'll look at these simultaneously here. Okay, and now we'll look at these by themselves. This one here is its shape that's just morphing itself. That's this layer here. It's morphing itself. Okay. And then this one here is a shape that started off as a circle and then in the end frame was a square that was blue. Okay, so we'll look at that one. And basically it does all the in-between states. Okay. So a few things to keep in mind on how this is working. This is not working as a symbol, okay? These animations are not happening as a symbol. And I know that I told you that if you want to make something animate, it needs to be a symbol. And I guess I kind of lied. Sorry. What I'm trying to say is that basically the most powerful way to make an animation is if it's contained in a symbol. And the only time that you would want to not use a symbol would be in the case where you want something like this to morph. Okay. Now shape tweens are their own little breeds of animations in the sense that typically you don't want to use these. You want to use this sparingly if you do decide to use this. They're kind of messy and they don't always work the way you anticipate. They kind of take apart the animation and all of its pieces a lot of times. Okay. The examples that I'm showing you don't do that because they don't have outlines in them and they don't have multiple parts. So this is good for like simple shape tweens, okay? But you can go ahead and experiment with it and see what happens. The key thing to keep in mind is that this is not done with symbols here, and they're done in this raw state, kind of this merge mode that we see here, or in object mode. Either one will work. So again, this is just something I'm showing you so that you know that it exists. You may not need it in your animation. All right, so next step is to show you how these actually work, and I'm going to do that in a completely different document here. And basically I'm just going to make sure I don't have a stroke because it gets kind of messy. I'm going to take an object and fill it with a color. I'm just going to start with a square in this case here. Okay. And to create a shape tween that is just going to morph itself into another one, what I would want to do is I'm going to just rename this here. Shape tween morph itself. Okay. I'm going to go into the timeline here. I'm just basically picking 2 seconds time. And I'm going to right click and I'm just going to insert a keyframe. Okay, now what this does is it just makes this visible for 2 seconds. Okay, but at this particular point in time, you'll notice that the timeline is split. At this particular point in time, I can morph it into a different shape. And to do that, I would just, I could grab my white arrow or I could just go to the edges and try to modify this. Okay, but I'm just going to go in with my white arrow here and I'm just going to modify these edges here. Okay, and now if I go to the beginning, it's just going to go from this original shape. It's going to be like that for a while. And then at the very end in the keyframe where I told it to be different, it's going to jump to that. Okay, now to get it to morph and to do all the transition steps for you, what you want to do is go into the middle somewhere and right click and do create shape tween. Now you've already seen the motion tween and you've seen the classic tween. You want to work with create shape tween. Okay, and shape tween will only work on a drawing that is not in object mode, that it's in that raw state. Okay, so now if we go across, we'll see that it did that transition for us. Okay, all right, the next way that you can create a motion tween is to create a new layer here. Okay, and this one is going to be called shape tween morph to another object. Okay, and that's where we're going to take one object and completely change it into a different object. Okay, so on this one I'm going to create, let's start with a green oval. Okay, and I'm just going to draw it here on that layer, and notice it'll plug itself in. Okay, now at this particular point in time here, I'm going to right click and insert a blank keyframe. Okay, and now basically what it does is it leaves me with a blank keyframe here where I can choose a new object or draw a new object that this is going to transform to. Okay, instead of morphing the initial object, I'm going to actually put a whole different object in here. So I'm going to change into a rectangle that is, let's say, red. Okay? And now I'm just going to draw this. All right? Now we'll go from there to there. And you'll notice that these aren't overlapping. And that's fine. If they're not overlapping, they don't have to be. When the morph happens, it's just going to happen from here and it's going to end up over here. Okay? But I want mine to overlap. So I'm going to teach you this little tool here. It's called the onion skinning here. We just turn that on. And you can see from this range, it'll show you kind of what's visible, what's happening in all these frames for this span of time. And what I notice is that my circle is way over here and my rectangle is over here. And this just kind of basically allows me to see the overlap without having to jump around in my timeline, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my move tool, and in this last frame here where this object is, I'm just going to position it over here so that they morph kind of more on top of each other, okay? Now I'm going to turn my onion skin off. It just served its purpose already. All right, so now they're on top of each other. They're in that general same location. And the next step, again, just like before, is to click somewhere here in the timeline, right-click, and do a Create Shape Tween. And now what you'll notice, it'll start off green, and it'll naturally, as you move in the timeline, it'll morph and change colors and size and shape and everything to become the other object, okay? So those are your basic 2 types of shape tweens. All right, this concludes your lesson on shape tweens. If you have any questions, please make sure to contact me.